All right, Alex and Jack, welcome to the Walled Garden podcast. It's an honor to have you here, and I guess let's just start. Jack, you introduced Alex to me. There's obviously a reason why you did that, but maybe we'll give Alex the chance to introduce himself to our audience, and then maybe you just tell me how you two got acquainted, and then we'll just dive in. We'll see where we find ourselves.
Yeah, sounds good. It's really a pleasure to be here, Simon. Really love what you're doing with the Walled Garden, and excited to see where the community goes.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, Jack and I go way back. We went to grad school together back in those days, and he was a little bit ahead of me, so I looked up to him as kind of a guide in the ways of philosophy. I should just start by saying I'm a former academic. I spent a couple of years in the professoriate, and a couple of years ago, I guess 2.5 years ago, I left the beaten path, the standard track of academia, left a tenure track job for a variety of reasons. And I was a classicist, working in the study of Greco-Roman antiquity, especially the Greeks and the Greek philosophers of the later Roman Empire. So I left that all behind, and now I work in the private sector doing a few odd things. But I guess one of the reasons that we're here kind of has to do with my project that I'm working on that keeps me kind of in the classics world, which is, again, kind of following Jack's lead. He started a podcast a number of years ago, and I was really impressed with what he did and how he's able to reach people. I started my own about a little more than a year ago, and it's called The Cost of Glory. And I am retelling the basic pitch of the podcast is I am dramatically retelling Plutarch's lives for regular people. And we could probably dive into any number of those subjects, but yeah. That's who I am, and that's kind of how I know Jack.
I love it, man. Jack, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, Alex covered how we met, and we also became friends because we were both interested in learning how to speak ancient Greek, not just read it. And nobody teaches how to speak it anymore in academia. So we found kind of alternative gurus outside of academia to show us the ropes, and then we actually had a ancient Greek table once a week in grad school, which is a lot of fun. But I think Alex he downplayed a little bit what his podcast is. It's not just retelling. He's doing a lot more than that. Plutarch is an extremely influential author who, for many of the luminaries of the Renaissance, was like the greatest preserver of ancient wisdom. But today it's hard for people to appreciate him because there aren't many good translations out there, and there's a barrier to entry. Like, he's writing for a Roman audience. He's not writing for people who are used to distractions in the entertainment world, so he doesn't use narrative methods that people use today to tell stories that keep you roped in. So Alex is really not only updating the stories to make them accessible, but he's also making them more compelling, turning them actually into stories, because what Plutarch gives is kind of biographical compilations, and Alex turned them into gripping narratives of successes and failures that people can relate to today and learn from.
Yeah, blushing a little bit, but I think that does kind of capture it. And I guess to elaborate on that point a little bit, like, I discovered audiobooks when I was really late in grad school, and I listened to like a professional recording of Middlemarch and then Moby Dick, and I was like, I would never like sit down and read these books. I'm just too busy. But I listened to these books like washing the dishes, and I had a blast. And I was like, wow, there's something about this medium that is different, and there's a lot of potential here. And then when I was teaching a Roman history class and trying to kind of expedite my workload as a junior professor, I came to like Plutarch's Life of Marius, which is like relevant for the thing that I was teaching. And I was like, God, I just couldn't pay attention to it. That the language was so stilted, and the ones that are available on Audible this great old modification of a Dryden translation. It's very artistic, but it's kind of hard to follow. And, even though I'm a classicist, there's a lot of names and places and just a lot to kind of distract you that you don't know. And I found it hard to follow. I'm like, well, if I have trouble following Plutarch and I have a PhD in classics, like maybe there's some like translation work to do here in a way. And so that's kind of what I envision I'm trying to do, kind of keep to Plutarch's scope and importantly his goals in writing these biographies, which is, yes, to entertain, and there's a ton of entertaining anecdotes and humanity in them, but also to give you moral examples that you can contemplate, not flawless examples by any means, and he admits that himself, but that because you can see lives in action and live accordingly, like up your own lights in life, and that's the project of the lives. I think is really the project of all of Plutarch's writings. There's two main kinds of writings that he put together. It's one of the hugest corpuses from antiquity of any author that we have. And more than half of it is moral essays, the Moralia, as they're called, which are shorter essays on topics like how to tell a friend from a flatterer, how to praise yourself without giving offense, and sayings of the Spartans, all kinds of cool, useful stuff. And then I think the project is very similar to the lives. They're just kind of a different genre, which he's telling these biographies of heroes. But and I do a little bit of the Moralia and shorter episodes of the podcast as well. But that's okay. That's maybe enough about my project in summary.
No, it's awesome. I think that what you're doing is such an important service for our time. I mean, the fact that you've mentioned that you as a classicist even struggle to really get in depth and understand these things. And so what you're trying to do is I think we all need to bring these profound ideas and stories down to earth for everybody. And that's certainly something that is so beautiful about the podcast medium is, you can go directly to people's ears and you can tell a story in the way that is going to reach people and in ways that it's going to pierce their heart, And it's funny, the other day, so I mentioned this to you in an email, but I was going through my favorite new bookstore here in town, the secondhand bookstore, and I found these two perfect condition Oxford classics of Robin Waterfield's translation of Plutarch's Lives.
Nice.
And I wouldn't have known about those books, and they wouldn't have stood out to me. And I probably wouldn't have bought them if I hadn't have already talked to you about what you're doing and why it's been important for you. But I guess when people think of going back to the classics, they're probably usually thinking going back to the philosophers, people like Seneca or Marcus Aurelius or Plato. What are they getting out of Plutarch's Lives that they wouldn't necessarily get out of, say, first-hand philosopher talking about life, sort of thing?
Yeah, that's something that Jack and I've talked about some. And this is one thing that I noticed when I was leaving academia and looking at trying to kind of see what people were doing in the business writing as I was trying to adjust to a new lifestyle and reading. You start reading the business books and the self-help books, personal development, and you start to see just the last 10 years, just an explosion of Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. So why is it that people are into the Stoics and why not Plutarch, and what's different? I think in a way, I mean, it's funny, Plutarch has possibly been even more influential than those other authors maybe before this century. But he hasn't really been on the map yet. I think it's maybe there's a little bit more of a higher barrier to entry. And the thing that's different about Plutarch, and it's not a very high barrier, I should say, but the thing about Plutarch is he's a Platonist philosopher. And so he agrees with the Stoics on like 95% or 98% of just about everything. I mean, there's such a unity of thought about the four virtues, how to deal with fate, focus on what you can control. There's so much kind of there in terms of they have similar ideals of the kind of person or the kind of people that the philosophy is supposed to create, with some nuances of difference. But Plutarch's approach is very different. And the Stoics are so good at the three I mentioned, at least, at these kind of pithy maxims like stop debating about what a good man is, be a good man, or the richest man is the one who needs the least, or of books read much, not many. So, and Plutarch can kind of go in that mode, but he tends to he's not known for his concision, let's say. But what he does really well is he's culled examples, stories. The Greeks called them kreia, short stories that have a moral point about a specific person, a specific place, saying something specific, or long stories. And I think this has to do with his Platonic credentials, his Platonic upbringing. He's a follower of Plato. Plato, outside of narrow academic circles in antiquity, was most known probably for being an amazing writer and a great portrayer of character in his dialogues. You read the dialogues, and you really get a sense of what Socrates was like, at least from Plato's perspective, what Protagoras was like, Prodicus, Gorgias, Theaetetus, et cetera, whoever Theaetetus is. But so you get, and he's also a great teller of myths, of stories. Platonic myths are such an important part of the Republic and the Phaedrus and the Phaedo and so on. And he lays so much stress in the Republic on, when he's talking about the ideal education for the ideal city, the importance of stories for the upbringing of children, because stories can seep into your mind subconsciously and instinctively, and that's really what shapes your person more than anything that some philosopher is going to come along and argue to you. And Plato recognizes that, even though he's a great master of argument as well, and he sees the value of that, but he knows what he's doing and what he's not able to do with argumentation. And so Plutarch, I think, is really following in the footsteps of Plato there, and just trying to put forth stories above all as his persuasive medium to accomplish maybe some of the similar goals that Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius are after.
So
that's one unique
thing. Yeah. The power of stories, the power of especially stories about great people of history. Yeah. And I wanted to kind of open up the discussion, Jack, jump in here as well, because you've both spent considerable time studying the great people of history, and the heroes of history. And I wonder, what would you say about the nature of heroism or greatness? Are greatness and heroism almost the same thing? Are they separate? But what is the nature of greatness? What is the nature of heroism?
Jack, you got a take on that?
Yeah, well, I think I can offer a take on that, and also tie it in with the previous point. So about why Alex might have chosen Plutarch as his area of exploration and sharing, when the world is now caught up in Stoic mania. The Stoicism offers a full package, right? It's got a starter pack, it's got a intermediate pack, it's got the advanced pack, and it promises complete happiness, right? And this was parodied even by Plutarch himself has somewhere a parody where maybe he repeats a parody where somebody came to a Stoic, went behind closed doors, did a few hours of training, and he emerges like a god, just suddenly happy and glowing and everything, right? So and to go back to your second point now, heroism, I think Plutarch kind of he's more in line, or picks up the more archaic pre-Stoic notion that heroism and greatness always entail tragedy, that it's impossible to attain greatness without hubris. There's never been an ancient Greek hero who attained greatness and said, okay, you know what, I'm going to press the brakes now because going any further would be hubris. No, they always keep going, and they always suffer, and Plutarch really brings that out in his stories. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't. It's kind of, in a way, it's a weird aspect of the Greek mentality, but it's also a fascinating one. This idea that greatness always entails tragedy, and yet it's still something to strive for.
Yeah, totally.
Man, that's an awesome point. I just have to, because is what you're saying that when you said that, I was kind of just thinking, yeah, you don't get greatness without resistance, because without resistance, there's nothing to overcome, and it's in the overcoming that's a necessary element. And without anything to overcome, yeah, what the hell are we? Even as humans, you know what I mean? Like that's an interesting line of thought. But yeah, go on, Alex.
Yeah, that's great. And another way to put that, what you were saying, Simon, is in the Greeks have such a strong conception of agon, of contest, that this is where heroes are made. And you see this all over the Iliad and the Odyssey. The hero is the one who suffers, and it's through the suffering, which is a kind of in a way, the agon is a spectacle where it's like if you were a hero and nobody knew it, you wouldn't even be a hero. Like you have to show it to people in a way, and that the agon, the contest, is like how you do that. Yeah, well, on this heroism and the archaic conception of heroism, there's a story that I heard a long time ago that has always stuck with me. I forget the guy's name, but there's some like, I think he's like a boxer or a wrestler from this little island of Astapalaya, and he's like an Olympic champion. We're talking 6th century BC, so archaic period, and he's just like he slays an opponent in the arena at the Olympics, which is hubris, no question. Like you're not supposed to do that, but he does it anyway because he can. And then he goes home and he hears that the judges of the Olympic Games have decided that even though he would have been the prize winner, because he killed his opponent, which is just a flagrant, excess, that they deprived him of his prize, of his gold medal. And so he goes home, and in a fit of rage, he smashes the pillars holding up a school and kills dozens of children in the school. Like a horrific, monstrous thing to do. And I think he kills, I think maybe the citizens chase him into a temple, and he like locks himself up into a box, and they throw the box into the ocean. It's just this horrific story of excess and suffering. And then the citizens experience this famine on the island, and they go to the Oracle of Delphi. I think it's Delphi, some oracle. And the oracle says, you're having a famine because the man that you just threw into the ocean is a hero, and he needs to be sacrificed too. Whoa. Is that what a hero is? This, an extraordinary human being of power, of maybe like something, fearsome and destructive even. That aspect is there. And I don't think Plutarch really takes it that far, but you see that in his admiration of some characters like Lysander or Sulla. These are the lives that I'm working on right now. I just finished Lysander, and Sulla's coming out soon. And these guys are villains in many, many people's stories. And in a way, they're villains for Plutarch too. And he's aware of the kind of excess, and he'll blame them, but he won't let his moralizing dominate the story. And he'll let you kind of make up your own mind to some extent, because these guys were also heroes for people who were their partisans. So I love that about Plutarch, that he opens that door for nuance, and you can appreciate the good qualities that a man like Lysander had, who was tricky and just cold-blooded, and Sulla was the same, and famously disruptive. Lysander for the Constitution of Sparta, and Sulla really was responsible as much as anybody, probably more than Marius, for the great Roman Civil War. I mean, tens of thousands of his own citizens he slaughtered, Sulla. But he was a hero for as many others. And I think Plutarch is really drawn to these figures of excess, because maybe he sees that other people are drawn to them too. And he can kind of bring you into the philosophical project through meeting you where your attention already is.
Hi friends, we'll be right back with this episode, but for now, I wanted to tell you about one of the services that we are proud to offer in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society, and that is philosophical mentoring. This is a method of coaching that aims to bring the mentee's actions into alignment with their most noble aspirations. And as mentors, we do this by holding space for philosophical dialogue and mutual discernment of the paths that lead to a flourishing life. At the Walled Garden, we have a whole team of truly world-class philosophers who are here and ready to walk with you as you face life's many challenges and opportunities. And we just love to meet you and see how we can help. If you'd like to book an initial consultation, just go to thewalledgarden.com/mentoring. Again, that's thewalledgarden.com/mentoring. We look forward to working with you, but for now, enjoy the rest of this episode. It's really interesting, and you mentioned there, because he recognized that other people were also drawn to these people, because there is an element of, a hero. It could also just be the person who the general public just naturally choose or lift up. I wonder. Okay, so there's so many things I wonder based on what you guys are saying. It's awesome. But I wonder, back in these days, obviously, when we're talking about these complicated figures, we're talking about excess, these wild characters. It was a wild time. And so a hero back then looked completely different to what we might consider to be a hero today. It's funny. On one hand, I might ask you, okay, well, do you think we've become too soft in our conception of a hero today? I think that the kind of general utilitarianist perspective that we have today of everybody's caught out within 10 years of dying. Well, they were this and they were that, and they were a terrible person here, and that no matter how much good they did, no matter how much of a quote unquote hero they were, it's very easy to pick people apart and to push them back down. And so on one hand, I wonder if we've become too soft in our conception of a hero today, whether we need to introduce that thought of the complexity, the context, the nuance, the wild character. But then on the other hand, I think that all of those characteristics exist in the heroes that we, the public, naturally lift up in the Marvel movies. It's like these hero movies, every hero is extremely complex, and look at the damage that they do to the civilization while they're saving. It's like, so I wonder, maybe there's an element of we say one thing but we actually feel another way, because look at how much money these movies are making. I don't know, your comments, I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I think that's really perceptive. It's the destruction of a city as you're fighting some space alien, is the collateral damage is kind of there for shock and entertainment effect in the movie, and we don't really think of it. But how do you capture that in an ancient in a narrative, in a story? What's the collateral damage? I mean, maybe it's similar. I think that's really interesting. I have to think more about that. Jack, you got a take on modern versus ancient heroes?
It's such a huge topic, and fascinating one. I think that we've seen a we've seen an interesting shift over the past century or more, where we now associate suffering with heroism. So if someone is, someone survives 3 iterations of cancer, right? And then they still survive, wow, that person's a hero, right? And I don't disagree with that. I think that person is a hero in the way we think of a hero, but that's not the ancient conception of a hero. Then again, I think that you do see this shift in the ancient world as well, because the ancient world, what we call the ancient world, is 1.5 millennia. Okay, so there's a lot of variation going on there, and I think that if you go from the archaic period where that boxer that Alex talked about went full Darth Vader on those kids, and then you go fast forward 600, 700, 800 years, you see that same shift where suffering becomes heroic. So the obvious example is Jesus. Okay, Jesus is a hero in the modern sense, but he's an ancient hero, right? So I think that I think that's another reason why Plutarch is relevant, is that he's at the end of this long evolution of various ways of thinking, and we can look back at the previous centuries where we've changed our ways of thinking, and those, I mean, I think those trajectories kind of match up, but that's a different topic. So I think that Plutarch is wrestling with various notions of heroism that had been developed over the past many centuries, just like we think about that today, as evidenced by your question.
Yeah, and I mean, in Christianity, you've got the martyrs also, that following the example of Jesus. That's very much in our kind of hero vocabulary. Like, Gandhi's not an ancient Greek hero, but he's very conceivable as a kind of Christian hero, even though obviously not a Christian. But yeah, and so I think that the martyrs also remind me of kind of a different topic that I think is, in a way, why you see a rise of biography in the Roman period in particular. Plutarch is kind of it could be partly our sources just bringing more data just because of what survived, but I think there really is a shift in interest in popular interests in the lives of great people. And maybe we wouldn't want to say that they're all like heroes, or maybe the concept of a hero is a really specific one, but that writers are recognizing and readers are demanding in the Roman period more stories about just exemplary humans. I mean, you have the biographies of Suetonius, which are kind of gossipy and salacious, but also these are about the emperors, the Roman emperors. And obviously you start to have like the lives of saints become a big theme, especially in the 4th century on, starting with the life of Antony and the Desert Fathers. But also you get at the same time the life of Plotinus, is a very influential biography written by his student Porphyry. Plotinus, a 3rd century Platonic philosopher, who quotes a lot of the Stoic philosophers as well himself. And there starts to be an interest in like seeing how these men lived, to see whether they matched with their doctrines. The biographies of Diogenes Laertius, which is from probably 3rd century AD, which is where we get so much of our stories of really all the philosophers, but especially the Stoics, the early Stoa. I think Plutarch is really kind of an innovator in this tradition, and kind of sees this is how you can communicate philosophy to a popular audience, because it has to do with the whole principle that Aristotle articulates. Character is revealed in action. Character is the sum total of a kind of a supervenient quality upon actions over time. And this informs Aristotle's view, interestingly, both of ethics and of drama. So Aristotle sees this connection between, compelling drama has to portray character, and character is like one of the main things we're interested in drama. And I think that has a lot to do with our kind of neurobiological instincts to want to live effective lives, and the way that we've conveyed useful information, especially in an oral culture. We've really programmed ourselves over however many thousands of years of evolution to pay attention to stories, because this is how you get the data that you need to solve your problems. And heroes are part of that, but there's a bigger kind of ecosystem behind it.
Yeah, I love how you put that you need this data, or I'd say data, but yeah, that's such an interesting way of looking at these stories. It's data on the human experience and what it means to be great, what it means to be a hero. And it's almost like proof of concept over time. It's a brilliant way to think about it. I mean, I've never dived as deep as I probably should have into narrative or, hero stories. And I'd really like to, because my brother he's always sending me videos of, look at this thing about Alexander the Great, or, Cortez, or, like these really complicated figures of history. And I think today there's definitely a portion of the population who are, these are just like, stupid dead white men who just power hungry. What can they possibly teach us? Okay, pushing that aside, there's something that my brother gets out of this, like it really enriches his life reading these stories of these great men who he can kind of identify with and say, like you said, this is the data, this is what I need to follow, this is the path I need to follow. But maybe I'm interested in, the path of the hero is one path, but then you've got the path of the sage, you've got the path of the saint. I wonder how you guys would differentiate these three, because they're almost like the peak of the mountain, for the pursuit that you're on. Maybe one's more of a warrior type, archetype, one's more of a philosopher archetype, but it's interesting, to think about, what's the difference between saint, sage, hero, I don't know. I'll throw it over to you guys.
Well, Simon, sorry to bounce this back to you, but you're the expert on the path of the sage and the path of the saint. So maybe you can give us like a seed upon a nucleus of thought that we can try to react to. So
a nucleus of thought. Okay. Yeah. Well, one thing that I've been thinking about, I'll throw this out there. Here's the seed. It seems to me like we need to bring this idea that Plato gives us into the conversation of imitating the divine. And one thing that I've considered about the nature of sagehood, really, no matter whether you think it's possible or not to attain sagehood, even though probably a lot of people would say, like you said, Alex, somebody like Gandhi, perhaps he was the sage, or but perhaps there's something about getting closer to divinity than anybody else. What I mean? Like not necessarily as if it's like a competition, but the Christians certainly believe that Christ was like the final answer. It's like he was the only one, he was God, he wasn't even close to God, he was God, and he showed us that. Others will say, well, his message was actually that we're all God and we need to recognize that. But I'm interested in that idea, and perhaps that's the philosophical path, is imitating the divine. But then it seems to me like that idea carries across into heroism as well, and also into sainthood. So I'm going to throw one more thing in here. I often talk about a comedian called Tim Dillon. Are either of you familiar with Tim Dillon?
Rings a bell.
Not
okay,
really.
It's fine. Yeah, he actually just finished doing a tour. Actually, no, his Netflix series, his Netflix special is called A Real Hero, right? And I genuinely believe that Tim Dillon is a real hero. And the reason I say that is because, like, he is this really complicated figure. In almost every way, he's a shit person. Like he during the 2008 crisis, he was selling junk bonds and junk loans to people out of a Florida loan shark business. He is vulgar. He just says whatever comes to his mind. But there's an element of heroism in him, I believe, because he is 100% in on being exactly what he is and playing exactly the role that he needs to play in the culture, which is the Joker, going out there and speaking, the things that everybody feels but will not say. And so he's an extremely complicated figure. I call him a hero, but would I call him a sage? I don't know. Maybe that's more of a contemplative tradition. So I'll throw it out there. Those are my 20 seeds.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, this reminds me of a passage in Plutarch, his Moralia. There's a text he wrote on tranquility of mind, where he talks about, the anxieties that you can have from comparing yourself to other people. And I think Plutarch is really a proponent of comparing yourself to other people, but in certain controlled ways. But he talks about how, well, you think, you're upset because you're not a general commanding armies. You're a lawyer doing your thing, or you don't have the wealth of Ismenias or the bravery of Epaminondas, and so on and so on. And he says, think on the saying of the poet, and it is, rule the Sparta that you got. There's a passage in one of Euripides' lost plays where the Spartan king is like comparing himself to the Athenians, who are so sophisticated, and the Asian Greeks with their innovation, and on and on. And somebody says to him, yeah, but you're the king of Sparta. Like, Sparta needs to be Sparta. And in a way, like, I think the hero sort of knows who he is. He knows whether he's a lion or a fox, and goes all out on the mode that he's in. And like, you're right, there are a lot of different archetypes for human excellence. And and sometimes they often kind of meet at the top in ancient thought, at least. Like the philosopher, paradoxically, he's supposed to be the most kind of immune and above the world of the dirty world of politics, but he has something that's of extreme value to the ruler, which is wisdom. And there's a story of Alexander meeting Diogenes the Cynic in Corinth, I think. And, he comes up to Diogenes just wanting to meet this extraordinary philosopher, and he stands before him kind of imposing, and he says, Diogenes, you may make one request of me. I am so impressed with your continence and so on. And Diogenes says, yes, could you step outside of my sun, please?
The best story ever.
Yeah.
I love that one.
And then Alexander says, if I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. And Diogenes says, if I were not Diogenes, I would wish to be Diogenes. But they have this discourse, and the way that Dio Chrysostom imagines it, there's many versions of the story, but then they have this discussion of what is truly valuable, and Alexander thinks, oh, what am I really doing? And but there's so many stories of, in reality, in history, like, so many philosophers do end up kind of advising rulers. Pericles and Aspasia, to take a multi-gender example. Plotinus was buddies with Emperor, was it Aurelian or Gratian? It was one of those short-lived 3rd century emperors, and on and on and on. And but then you get these paradoxical oppositions between Socrates, the wise man, and the political powers that be. So there's definitely a difference, and I think that probably Plato would say that the philosopher is imitating God for sure. Stoics would agree, but the Homer would say that Achilles is imitating the gods too, right? It's just a different quality of the gods. And I don't know, maybe that's a criteria for any kind of excellence in the Greek mind, at least.
Yeah, I would hope that we can bring that idea back down to earth for the current generation, and I think that there's a lot of interest out there in that idea about what does it mean to imitate the divine? What is the divine? Because I think it's just interesting to see how for so many years now we've been really falling away from standard religions and more classical ways of thinking about philosophy. But I think that's starting to change. I think people are really waking up to how meaningless the world is without these sorts of ideas. And I think on top of that, it probably has to start with all of us recognizing how little we actually understand these ideas. they're so profound, and I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of my understanding of the Greco-Roman mind and the way that they saw the world. I don't know, what is that idea to you guys? Like, what of imitating the divine? What does it mean to you? What did it mean to them? I mean, I know we've kind of just gone through that with, you know, becoming a hero, things like that, but yeah, maybe just riff on that for a bit.
Well, if I can pick up the thread here. So I thought that was really interesting, Alex's last point, that that the hero and the philosopher are both imitating the divine in their own way. And I think maybe as humans, we all want to live forever, at least at some stage in our lives. And so in a sense, we want to become gods. And Homer had a view of what that entails. And I think Plato wanted to modify the method. I mean, so I have this theory. I want to write something about this someday, maybe do a podcast about it. But I have a theory that Socrates is a philosophical version of Achilles, which is funny because Plato seems to really dislike Achilles. If you look at the Republic, there's tons of quotations from Homer throughout the entire work, and almost everything negative. Every time he says, well, Homer is bad because he says this, it's almost always something Achilles said or did. Okay. And yet he has Socrates quote Achilles at two very crucial moments in his life / the portrayal by Plato. So one is when in the dialogue called the Crito, where Socrates' friends come to him in his prison. He's waiting to be executed. And they come to him in the middle of the night in his prison. And they're like, bro, we're going to get you out of here. Like, we got money. We're going to bribe the guards. We got a ship waiting for you. It's all, you know, and he says, it's okay. It's okay. I still have 3 days. And I'm going to stay here and just philosophize during those 3 days. Like, how do you know it's 3 days? The execution is supposed to be in 2 days. And he says, oh, I had a dream where, you know, some divine voice told him, on the third day you will be in Phthia. Now that's a direct quotation from the Iliad, where Achilles says, you know, screw you guys, I'm going to leave, and on the third day I'm going to be in Phthia. Okay, so Socrates is quote. Well, Plato has Socrates quote Achilles in the moment of the end of his life. That has to be significant. And the other place where this kind of happens is at the end of the cave analogy in the Republic, after Socrates has described this philosophical metaphor of the cave of ignorance that we're all trapped in, and the pathway out to the light. And then he says, now, wouldn't the person who had emerged from this cave had seen the light and then returned to see the plight of his old friends still shackled in the shadows? Like, wouldn't he rather be the slave of a slave on earth outside the cave than one of the people in the cave? And that again is a quote from the Odyssey, where Odysseus meets the ghost of Achilles in the underworld, and Odysseus says, hey, it's not so bad here, like, you're doing pretty well, you know, you're like a big dog here in the underworld among these ghosts. And Achilles says, nah, man, I'd rather be the slave of a slave up there on earth than king of all the dead. Okay, so it's almost as if Socrates is replacing Achilles as the hero, a new philosophical hero to replace. So we're going to get rid of Homer, as Plato says. We're going to remove him from the pin. You know, he's no longer going to be the central pillar of education, and instead, here's an alternative philosophical hero that you can emulate. And why are they, in a sense, similar? Well, one of the most famous lines attributed to Achilles is that more hateful than the gates of Hades is the man who says one thing but holds in his heart a contrary thought. So in a way, Achilles is like the manifestation of honesty, like complete honesty, but his way of living out that honesty, and like he forces the world physically to conform to what he sees as the honest, straightforward path. Okay. And Socrates is like, no. The way to be completely true to yourself and to the world is without force. It's with the mind. Okay. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, so that you guys can pitch in. But that's kind of my thought on the similarities and differences between the heroic path and the sage path.
I love it. And there's there's a line, excuse me, in the Iliad. I think it's when Achilles is like rejecting the embassy of Agamemnon to try to get him back to the war. Whatever the context is, Achilles says something like, I don't need Agamemnon's honor. I am honored by Zeus himself. And that's a line that several Neoplatonist philosophers quote to speak of the independence of philosophy. Synesius of Cyrene, this guy I wrote my dissertation on, actually, and I think he's quoting Plotinus quoting that line. So yeah, this fascination continues on, the kind of heroic. Well, this is another thing about heroes, is like you can look at the hero, the traditional hero, let's say, and get inspiration for other kinds of excellence. And the philosophers like recognize that on a practical level, that like, and I could rattle off a bunch of examples about this, but, this is one of the reasons that we need these stories of greatness, because we're not necessarily trying to be that kind of hero, but there's something about the excellence and maybe the aspiration to be godlike in the best ways, can transfer to that kind of sage energy that you need, or the saint energy that you need, or the pinnacle businessman or athlete, or whatever it is. Like there's a kind of intensity that it requires to do anything at the highest level that transfers well, and I think the philosophers probably recognize that.
Yeah, this is great stuff. I mean, something that's kind of sticking out to me as you guys are speaking about this is the importance of that Delphic oracle, know thyself. Perhaps know thyself is the golden key to even then being able to become a hero or to become a sage, because once you know what you are, then you have the opportunity to live exactly that, to not hold any contradictory, opinions. And there's something about, well, as Sharon LaBelle has said, and I've said it over and over again on this podcast, we need to learn how to sit in our seat in the theater of life, and there's something about perhaps a hero or a sage or a saint is somebody who just, they're a square peg in a square hole and they just get it right. Like it's just somehow, whether it's by the gifts of fate or fortune or whatever it is, they manage to know themselves, and then to perfectly be in alignment with that self. I'd love for you to comment on that little thought, but also, Alex, you brought in an interesting point there, because you're talking about business people or sports people or whatever it is, father, mother, and you call yourself an ancient life coach, if I'm correct. And so I'm really interested in, how do you bring these ideas into the to the business world or into parenting or whatever it is, how do you coach your students with these ideas? Hi friends, we'll be right back with this episode. But first, I wanted to let you know that most of the conversations that you hear on this show were recorded live at events and workshops in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. We are so grateful for the quality of our guests and the kind of conversations that we get to have at these events, and we'd like to invite you to attend and join the conversation. Our events feature contributing philosophers of the Walled Garden, as well as world-class philosophers, theologians, artists, and spiritual leaders from all around the globe. If you'd like to come along, then just go to thewalledgarden.com/events. From there, you can find an event that you're interested in and register with a donation of your choosing. Or, if you're a subscribed caretaker in the Walled Garden, then you can get into all of these events for free by simply logging into the website and joining the Zoom waiting room via the event page. Again, go to thewalledgarden.com/events to register today. We look forward to seeing you there, but for now, enjoy the rest of this episode.
Yeah. So to go back to the know thyself point, I was reading, rereading Plutarch's Life of Demosthenes. At the beginning of that, he has an interesting discussion about how similar Demosthenes and Cicero were, and how they were different from most of the heroes that he's treated for a variety of reasons, but very similar to each other. And he says, I guess that, you really have to know yourself to get it right, something like that. But he says, if that were as easy to do as it sounds, we probably wouldn't have needed a god to tell it to us, for it to be like the maxim of the Pythian oracle at Delphi. Yeah, no, I think it's really what I try to do is present, is reflect on the stories and the examples that Plutarch offers, or that I find. I'll look at other ancient texts for useful crai, and live in my life. I have 2 kids. I'm holding down a couple of jobs, and it's thinking about what would apply to me. And one of the times that I got convinced of the usefulness of ancient texts for this purpose, I was reading towards the end of leaving academia. I knew that I was heading off to private sector, and I think I was reading the life of Sertorius, and just realizing, wow, these biographies of Plutarch are probably the most useful and accessible thing that I've really ever read from antiquity for like regular people in the practical world. Like, there's this time that Sertorius is he's in the middle of a civil war. He's trying to retreat to Spain, and he's got to cross the Pyrenees to get to Spain, where he can set up a base of operations. And he gets held up by these like tribal warlords in the mountains, and they're just barring his passage. They're going to roll boulders down on the troops, and they're demanding tribute. And his officers say, "Don't pay off those chumps. We could take them." And they could, like, he has like a Roman legion with him, and these guys are just, wild men. And but he says, no, for a man bent on great deeds, nothing is more valuable than time. And he pays them off, and he just marches through, rather than spending 2 weeks that he could have lost. And like, immediately, like, for me, that was like, oh, well, this could apply in all kinds of situations in business. Should we use our own resources to develop a product on our own, or should we just private label a product and get it to market, just so we can have something? And depends on what battle you're trying to win. Maybe the battle of like complete ownership of some brand is not as important as having something out there. Should we use our resources this way or that way? All of Plutarch and really so many stories in history, if you're reading history for practical purposes, which is another conversation we could have, so much of it is really looking at the way that leaders are making decisions, what pros and cons they're weighing, about weighing risks, and weighing whether I should ally with this person or that person. So much of it comes down to character too. And so I try to just take them kind of story by story and relate these situations to situations that people could come up with in their lives. Maybe I'm kind of the weird one with my overactive imagination, seeing how valuable and practical Plutarch is. I think it does take a bit of like thinking through, but so much of what makes business difficult, and this is something that I know maybe more from reading business books than experience at this point, but I've been in it for a while. Like, so much of what makes business hard is our perennial problems with people and making tough decisions with imperfect information, and like, how do you make those decisions? So so that's one way. I don't know if that helps. It's not really a parenting response, but
no,
I encounter
and I don't
too.
think you're crazy at all. That it's so self-evident these stories have practical application for our time. Jack, I don't know if you had anything you want to jump in with.
Well, that's That's really fascinating, Alex. And it made me think of this one time I opened up, YouTube, the landing page, and it kept on like trying to get me to watch this video about some famous battle in World War II from, I think it was a battle of Midway from the Japanese perspective. Okay. And it's like 40 minutes long. And it had like 8 million views. I'm like, okay. On the 11th time YouTube showed this to me, I was like, fine, let me just see what this is about. Okay. And you start the video, and it's like, it portrays the battle like a video game, like a strategy video game. And it has the fog of war. So at any moment, you only know what the Japanese knew at that time. And then the narrator is like, so here, like, what would you decide to do if you had 1 hour before the planes arrived, and these were the stakes, right? And it's just, you get put in the seat of the general or of the prime minister or the emperor or whatever, and it's a workout, and that's kind of what I think Alex is bringing out in his podcast, that you get to ride along in the boots of Sertorius or Lysander or whomever, and at any moment you're invited to think, what would I do in this tough call, right? Would I pay off these tribes? Would I fight them? And I think that's a mental workout that has, obvious benefits to any kind of business environment today.
Yeah.
And kind of another tack that you could take on the practical and heroic is so like there's a kind of we don't typically teach history this way anymore. I think that's fair to say that, like, if you start talking about great figures and great heroes and tough decisions at tough times, you're kind of a popular historian, and that has a pejorative context in academia, though of course not entirely, but it's a kind of a tendency, and there's a lot of reasons for this. We don't have to go into the history of the discipline of history, but that was already kind of happening. There was already kind of like trends in place in the 19th century that Nietzsche was recognizing, and he wrote this this book about the use and misuse, or the advantages and disadvantages of history, and he has this whole discussion that I think is really interesting about how there are different ways of approaching history. I think he has 3. There's like the antiquarian mode of approaching history, which is like local traditions and who built that bridge and why did they put that little emblem on there. Here's fun facts and genealogies and kind of like, this might be useful someday. It's precious to me because it's my own history, or it's like the history of my people, my town. Then there's like revolutionary history, which is kind of about deconstructing institutions, or kind of like revising the story to kind of undermine the credibility of something, or there's kind of political agenda history. And they have this third category of history, which I think is interestingly different from the second one. He calls it it's heroic, the heroic approach to history, to relate back to what we're talking about. And he says that the heroic approach to history uses history not for the facts, but for kind of the instinctual spirit that it draws out in us. And when anybody actually makes history, they have to enter a kind of fog, a different kind of fog than what Jack was talking about. But like, you have to kind of not think about all the precedents and all the reasons that this could go wrong and all of the complications and all of the kind of predictions. And you have to kind of get out of the analysis paralysis that you could if you were like, oh, we should read 5 books about this country before we invade it. Sertorius doesn't do that in Spain, right? Like, you have to make a decision. You have limited time to make it, and this is how history is made. You kind of bring out the instinctive, and you can will the impossible in that way, because history ultimately, for the heroic perspective, isn't about precedents and isn't about like learning lessons. It's about like infusing your spirit with this like will to, do something that hasn't been done before, or as far as it hasn't been done, and people don't think it can be done. And he says something like, tell me the story not of so and so and his times, but how so and so stood against his times. And he towards at the end of this passage, he says, "Satisfy your souls on Plutarch." And 100 men who were educated on these texts could do away with the noisy pseudo education of our age. So there's like, we have a lot of cultural barriers to getting the most out of the great stories of the past, I think. And I think there's tons of work to be done, and like bringing it's a ever renewing challenge to create meaning out of the past and give people energy in the present.
Yeah, man, I love that. That's such an important point, is that the real hero needs that courage to stand against their times, to go out there and be the odd one out, to go against that. That's so interesting. It's funny that the thought that popped into my mind was, I'll share a tiny bit of a private conversation I had with Joseph Siracusa recently. He is somebody who, when I think of a hero, it's Joseph Siracusa. This guy is, President Emeritus of the Australian Council for Humanities and Social Sciences, just represented Australia at the Non-Nuclear Proliferation Conference in Washington, D.C. Every week he's on the news talking about politics and, speaking truth to power, saying this is not good. Things are not good. And he says to me in this conversation, imagine hearing this from a guy who is the world leading expert on the history of nuclear weapons. He says, "Man, Simon, you haven't got a lot of time. We're about 1 second to midnight on this nuclear weapon thing." And I'm sitting there thinking, oh gosh, give me courage.
Wow.
Because not that it's my mission to go out there and stop the world from being, overcome by nuclear weapons or destroyed by nuclear weapons. But he was simply saying to me, now is a time of heroes. Now is a time to wake up. Sorry, I've got this cat behind me. What a juxtaposition. Hey, we're talking about heroism, and there's this adorable little kitten just like pushing things around on my desk.
We've got 1 second to midnight, and then your cat presses the red button.
That's it. And he would. But I just thought it's so important that we have people like that in the world who are saying to people, wake up. You haven't got time. Push against the grain. Do what you need to do, because this might not last. One thing that Joseph Siracusa says, he says, be very careful who you vote for, because they could get you killed. It's like, this guy knows what he's talking about. And so I love that. I think it's important. And I guess maybe one more question for both of you. And then I think what the audience will have been hoping for throughout this entire interview is that we get to hear both of you converse in ancient Greek. But what is honor to you? And perhaps I'll clarify. You feel free to give an answer of what was honor to the Greeks or the Romans, but what is honor to you as well?
You want us to answer in ancient Greek?
I would love to, but then you got to translate for us.
O Alexandre, ti en hetime katatus archaius Helenas.
Thamaston ti pragma, o Ioane, kai ukoida hopos ero, isos estin he opsis ton alon, he blepe pros tas aretas.
Hi, orthos leges.
Wow, I love it. And how many people in the world do you reckon speak fluently this now kind of dead language?
Zero. Yeah, a handful. There's a few out there, but I think that Jack and I are both on a long-term mission to increase that number somehow. Yeah.
But probably I'd say the number of people that can have a conversation in the world is under 100.
Yeah. Wow.
That's probably right. Yeah.
That's so cool. And can you translate for us? What is honor?
Well, I just asked him, "Oh, Alex, what is honor according to the ancient Greeks?" And he said, maybe it's the appearance of virtue Well, you elaborate, Alex.
I think I said something like it's the gaze of others which searches for the virtues or something. I think you know, I guess I think of honor as this it's a social phenomenon that is you know, something that is granted to community members by other members of the community. It's got a kind of a scope to it, and it's not necessarily transferable to other communities. I think you have to kind of this is just based on my like reading of how ancient cities work, you know, in Athens, the like they don't have taxes for citizens. Like resident aliens are medics. They are beloved members of society, but they have to pay a lot more. They have to actually pay taxes like a regular, you know, levy. Citizens, however, are expected to contribute in other ways to the state with things like liturgies. Like rich citizens are they're pressured in various ways, but they're like pressured to fund a boat for the Navy, for example. And what they get in return is honor. And the Greek word for honor is also the Greek word for price. So it recognizes that there is a kind of transactional element to honor, like it's given in exchange for something, for service, and this kind of puts virtue into perspective from the Greek perspective. Like the Greek virtue is, for it to be really recognized as virtue, it's got to be valuable to the community. And you know, a person that can do frightening deeds of violence has a lot to offer a community that's constantly at war, right? So this is I think one of the reasons why heroes are these problematic figures. But that kind of has to, that's my perspective on honor, at least in the ancient world. And what is it, honor today? I don't know. It's hard because we've gotten so far away from knowing who our community is. The community in the modern world is so massively gigantic and so impossibly small. You know, it's like the whole of Twitter, or you know, or is it your company? Is the company really the giver of honor, or is it the industry? I mean, that's, you know, people always switching posts within the industry, athletes switching jobs from team to team. What's the community that gives honor? Is it the league, or is it the team? I mean, both in different respects, but I think that's kind of where I would go first with it. And sorry, that's a really theoretical answer, not necessarily that useful, but
it's great. I think it's an important answer. I mean, yeah, it is. I think what you said there, especially about our communities being so giant on the one hand, but then so small. When you said that, I had a visual, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's exactly how it feels. It's exactly how I experience it. You know, it's like, how do you have real community in a global world? This is another thing that Joseph Siracusa said to me the other day. By the time this comes out, it will probably be known how Joe is going to be involved with us in the World Garden. But he was kind of counseling me on what we're doing, and he was saying, you know, really the big question of humanities right now is, what does it mean to be human in a global world? Really, because like you say, it's just like everything changed when we had these social medias. I even heard who's the guy who wrote the wonderful professor who just wrote a book called The Dying Citizen. Oh man,
can't remember.
You know, I there's no way that I can continue without just quickly searching this.
Sure.
I know he's a very prominent philosopher, Victor David Hanson. That's it. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
right.
He was even talking about the fact that, well, is Facebook even an American company? Because it pays taxes in all of these different countries. You know, it's registered as a business in all these different countries. So yeah, it's interesting to think about, well, how does honor even interact with the fact that we are in this global world. But I don't know, Jack, did you want to jump in there after my spewing out of thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure how I can answer this without, I mean, you already opened up a can of worms at the end of this conversation by bringing in this huge topic, and I don't know how to answer it without just opening up more cans of worms. I mean, I will say that, just to kind of riff on Alex's point, that the Greek word time for honor also means price. And in Homer, your honor is literally the amount of money it would take to ransom you if you were kidnapped. Okay, so if Achilles is kidnapped, which is impossible, but let's just say it happened, you'd have to pay a lot to get him back. So he has a lot of honor. If somebody who works in the just transporting weapons to the front, some lowly soldier is kidnapped, they wouldn't even ransom him. So that's very low honor. Now, really over time,
really good, yeah.
I think that in the so-called Dark Ages, which is the Greek Dark Ages, which, like the later European Dark Ages, were a time of warfare and warrior kings, and where the only way to really have honor would be to be a warrior. In that time, time, or honor, was the highest social value. But that changes in the archaic period, where hoplite warfare replaces heroic warfare. So it no longer is strategically viable to be like a huge Achilles who can single-handedly kill 5 guys at once. You have to be in rank and file, like you have to move as a unit, otherwise you will lose the battle. So at that point, arete, or excellence, replaces honor as the highest social value. And the poets no longer praise the honor, but they praise the arete of fighters. Then the philosophers come and they change what arete actually means. So it's no longer military, but intellectual. And then I think eudaimonia, or happiness, replaces arete as the highest social value. So yeah, again, new can of worms, but
it is, because I have to ask another question now.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you guys have time?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I think that's a really interesting point that you make, that you can see this kind of development of what is the socially the highest good. What's the word that you used again?
Well, I use value, but
that's it.
Yeah.
On one hand, I could ask you, okay, well, no, what do you think is the highest value? Not what the society or the culture thinks, but what do you think? But I actually want to ask you today, what do you think is the highest social value?
People seem really, I don't know, people seem obsessed with entrepreneurs and innovators. That seems to cut across political divides. And, there's something heroic about, again, like, forcing some new vision of reality into the world. Kind of like they talk about how the Facebook movie was supposed to be this kind of morality tale about how, it's bad and look at how it corrupts you. But then all these kids got inspired to become tech founders after watching The Social Network. There's something that is maybe that we don't want to talk about politely, but just the entrepreneur is kind of like the innovator who succeeds in like making a dent in the world. Seems pretty up there. That's at least a candidate, I would say.
Jack?
Well, Alex is making me now reconsider what I said earlier, because I think, let me correct what I said. So I don't think that arete and then eudaimonia replaced time as the highest value, but rather among certain rarefied intellectual circles, it was pushed as a new highest value. I think that among the broader population, perhaps time in the ancient sense never really went away. And again, like, you shouldn't think the honor of a samurai dying for some, that's not what we're talking about. Like, honor, time, means like prestige, respect, fame. And I think in that respect, it's still there today as perhaps the single highest social value for the majority of people. Like, you want to be Steve Jobs. Well, what does he have? He has teammate. He literally has teammate. He's like the utmost respect, and he's considered a person of extremely high value for his society, right? So, I mean, quantifiable value, and that's what honor is. So, people that want to see the number of likes, the number of views on their videos, we've quantified and monetized prestige to the point where I think that just shows that teammate has never gone out of fashion. It's still there with us today.
Yeah.
There's just one little point on this that, in the later Roman Empire, the philosopher that I did a lot of research on, Synesius of Cyrene, he complains a lot, and he's really obsessed with how philosophy is honored in the political sphere. And I think this is a thread that runs through from Plato too, that, Plato talks about how nobody honors philosophy. The philosopher is the guy you imagine kind of like falling into a well, or, he's not dressed well, and he just doesn't have any honor in the democratic assembly or the courtrooms. He's not listened to, and they see this as a big problem. And I think this is one of the reasons why philosophers at least can think about like how it's important to connect with people who do have honor, not for the sake of the philosopher, but for the sake of philosophy, so that like people will basically honor whatever is close to the kind of epicenter of radiation of honor. And a person like Steve Jobs or whatever, Mark Andreessen, like they have a lot of like prestige to throw around, and politicians too, but especially kind of like, I think for us entrepreneurs and like wealthy people, like, the like what they do and what they value, there's a kind of mimetic contagion that happens. And so ancient philosophers, at least, were very actually kind of open about saying, we need to be there for the sake of philosophy and for the sake of like everybody, that our society run well, that it value virtue and courage and wisdom and all this stuff.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And throughout this whole conversation, I've had periods of thinking like, okay, we've got 2.5 years before Trump inevitably gets voted back in, and we need to find a philosopher who can advise that guy. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that's too much of a political point to make before we wrap things up. But seriously, you sometimes wonder, do we have the best philosophers in the world advising the people who have the most power in the world? And wouldn't it be nice if we did or could have that happen? I don't know anything about the higher echelons of Washington, but nonetheless, Alex, I love what you're doing, man. I'm so glad that Jack has introduced me to you, and our relationship is going to grow over time, I hope. And Jack, thank you for introducing us, and thank you for always being somebody who encourages me and lifts me up, and really you do that. Your words often come to my mind and inspire me to be better, and so I thank you for that. So thank you, both of you. And Alex, Jack, do you guys want to just share with the audience at home, hate that I just said that, the audience at home, but where people can find you and how they can get more involved?
Yeah, it's Simon. It's been a great pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks again, Jack. So you can find me at ancientlifecoach.com. That's my podcast's website. Got an email list that you can sign up for there if you're interested. Send out every week or 2 or 3, I send out an email, but it's also a source for updates. But you search for The Cost of Glory on any of your podcast platforms. You can find me. I'm also on YouTube. I think my channel is called Ancient Life Coach, but I just post my podcast there. So that's how to find me. What about you, Jack?
Yeah, well, I'm at Dr. Lantern Jack on Twitter, at Greece Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. The podcast is Ancient Greece Declassified. And let me just say, for those that want to check out Alex's podcast, my recommendation would be to start with A Life of Pyrrhus, because it's just an awesome story. Alex does it so well. That's where I would. I've listened to it twice through the 3 episodes, and I highly recommend it. So thanks again, Simon, for bringing people together in your growing community. Like, you're the reason why these conversations are happening. So it's been a pleasure, and thank you.
Yeah, at Cost of Glory on Twitter, by the way. Sorry, should have mentioned that.
Throw
Yeah,
that
thanks
one
again,
in.
Simon.
No,
Yeah.
of course, guys. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Walled Garden Podcast. This show is the central podcast of the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. To find out more about our events, services, and community, just go to thewalledgarden.com. Until next time, we wish you well as you nourish the gardens of your mind.